Okay, first things first, before we get started, I want to apologize to everybody that Linux is not getting done this week. And I wanted to do it. Yesterday was not going good. I was half falling asleep. One of the co-hosts was, through a series of unfortunate events, made unavailable, and it basically, there's plenty of valid stuff to go into for Linux this week. It just didn't get done. So we'll pick that up next week. We promise. We swear. It's just done something. But it's now iWorld, and the luck of 13 is no longer holding. It's episode 14. We now have no bit. We don't know where he is. He swore he'd be here, and now he's gone. Are you lagging, or is that like your video is being real choppy? I don't know if that's the internet or the lag or what.
Yeah, it's just that you sound alright. That seems to be coming through okay.
Okay. I should skip iWorld, but oh well, we're gonna do it. Any particular place you want to start?
Maybe the new MacBook Pro, I suppose.
Yeah, that's probably the most obvious thing. It's Steve Jobs' birthday, so of course the new MacBook Pros come out, and technically Steve Jobs got two birthday presents because he got the new MacBook Pros and he got the iPad's main competition, the Zoom, completely fucking up the launch. So it's like, but moving on to the MacBook Pros, it really pains me to admit this, but they have actually addressed a lot of the things that's wrong with them with this refresh. Not all of them. There's still plenty of things wrong with them, but they've addressed a lot of them. You own the one that's like one before, right?
Yeah, the one that was not the last version, but the one before.
Yeah, the one that doesn't have the spider screen. It is going to be interesting to see if this one winds up with that or not, because nobody really knows, like if that was because it was shared cards, or because it was doing the dynamic switching, or was some weird combination of the two.
Because again, they have got dedicated graphics, and they've got internal graphics again, haven't they? So again, just like the previous one, they've got two graphics in the machine.
And as far as I know, it's still doing the smart switching between them. And I think the smart switching is really what's causing the problem. It's further compounded by the fact that it was shared graphics, but it was the smart switching that would be triggering it. So now you have a dedicated and internal integrated smart switching based on it, depending how they've tweaked the smart switching algorithm for that. It may or may not be fixed. People will just have to buy them and find out. Expensive experiment. I do have to admit that potential problem aside, it is nice to see Apple adopting the idea of actually having what would be considered a modern graphics card, and that you have two options. You either get a dedicated 256 or you get a dedicated gig, 1024, which is and it's GDR5. I don't know if this is Apple putting a spin on it or if this is AMD doing this, but they're called AMD Radeon cards as opposed to ATI Radeon cards. And I'm like, okay. Then again, I know AMD is trying to kill the ATI name. They want to make, no, it's AMD. We own them now. That's like, but, yeah.
I mean, to be honest, when I heard that they were, going to change the name and go with their processor name for their graphics cards, I don't think that was necessarily a good idea, because you know, the name of ATI was, you know, a name that everyone knew in the graphics cards. When you hear AMD, you think of processors, not graphics cards.
Well, and that's something that AMD is trying to change and get reassociated. Apparently, they're starting with the MacBook Pros, but this is it doesn't look right. You know, I every time I see it, I want to say ATI Radeon. I'm like, oh no, wait, it's an AMD Radeon. I'm like, okay, that's whatever. The other good thing is they're using the newer i7s. They're using the more powerful i7s, i5s. So Apple has finally joined the rest of the computer industry, and that they are offering 1333 memory in their notebooks, which is something that Apple has not been doing. You know, it was right for them to be putting 1066 memory in there because that was the bus of the processors they were putting in their computers. But is one of those. It's nice to see them have upgraded and done that. That they're using the Intel CPUs that actually support that. Of course, all the current Intel CPUs support that. So the only way they couldn't would be to use older Intel CPUs. But it's nice to see that they have done that upgrade too. Because that's a better system all around for the end user. The other thing, it pains me to admit, like I said, that this is me going, these are things I've spent the last 6 months or so bitching about, and now they've actually addressed them. The other thing they did, the 13-inch Mac Pros are now running the same processor set. Not the exact same processors, but the same processor set of the 15 and 17 inch, which is I didn't understand. I never understood why Apple wasn't doing that because it had to be upping their costs to not do that. They're still missing one aspect of that, in that you cannot get the quad core. What they did was they upgraded the 15 and 17 inch to the quad core i5, i7s. And they're now using the dual core, the old ones, in the 13 inch. And that's one of those things I like. Okay, I can understand making that the base processor, but they're the same pin set, same socket. Why is there not an option in the 13 inch to, well, you know, I want a quad core, but I want a small book. You know, is there really nobody out there like that, or am I asking too much out of them?
I think probably what you'd find there is that if people say that, you know, Apple is to say that, you know, you have to make either a choice between a quad core or a small laptop, and so Apple would be basically saying if you have the MacBook Pro with the processor that you're not 100% keen on, or if you want a smaller laptop, then you go for the MacBook Air. I think that's what Apple are trying to do, to be honest. I think that they're trying to...
The processor on the MacBook Air is basically an overgrown atom. It's not even in the same league as the iSeries chips. It isn't. And that getting on the Air, that was something a lot of people were expecting, because Steve Jobs got up there on stage and said, you know, the future of computers is solid state and netbooks and yada yada. Like, oh, so the next MacBook Pro refresh is going to have all solid state drives, right? No. It's like they're still your 500, 700 gig drive. Like, what are they? It's 320 and 500 for the 13 inch, 500 and 750 for the 15 and 750. And they're still 5,400 RPM. They're not putting the 7,200 RPM drives in there. It's like, I'm glad they got the front side bus, but they still need to fix the spin rate if they're not going to use solid state drives to be the 7,200.
I mean, that's one thing that did get me when it came out, that they were going to stick with the hard drives. And one thing I did see some people saying was that they were like really disappointed that Apple didn't go down the same route and like flat on the board like crap they've done with the MacBook Airs. And my reaction to that was that the thing is, the name in the laptop itself says MacBook Pro, and Pro people want more storage. They don't want speed and high storage at all.
Oh, no. Pro people want speed, and that's the real reason I'm like, the MacBook should have 7,200 RPM drives in them. They should. Because if you're doing more pro-ish, I can understand sticking 5400s in Mac, and if the MacBook Air hadn't switched over to solid state in the MacBook Air, they're not intended to be a. It's the other reason why I don't like Apple. I'm glad to see that Apple has finally adopted the idea that their pro computer should actually have a decent dedicated graphics card in it for a laptop, as opposed to this ridiculously underpowered shared graphics, which is usually only on lower end systems. Upper end systems you want the dedicated, which was never an option if you were going the Apple route. Now at least it is for people who want to go the Apple route, which is a good thing for them. But there's still in the Pro. If it's not solid state, and like you're saying. And personally, I am one of the people who would fall in the league of, even though I would like to know that my drive's going to last more than 2 to 4 years of continuous spinning, I prefer the 500 to 1 terabyte of storage as opposed to ridiculously small storage. If I was more an average user who was just using a little bit more but average thought, a little 128 to 256 solid state would be sufficient. But for me, not so much, because I'm eating petabytes for breakfast over here. So it's like I definitely want at least half a gig on my laptop. So that's like overall, it is a bit of a mismatch. That they have begun to address things. But how much of it they're really fully addressing, it's they're back to the 1 to 2 business day shipping. That was the other reason everybody thought these are definitely coming out on Steve's birthday, because they started delaying the shipping times for the old ones, and that's.
Yeah, well, and obviously people got the guess that one right.
Yeah, well, it's like, and it made sense for that. Now, one thing I actually do have to check here that I did not check before we started doing this. Let's see, 2.53. I'm wondering, I think Apple might be doing something they swore they'd never do. Yes, they are. They are doing something they swore they'd never do. For Apple's big reason that they never offered 1333 memory was because they said, their systems wouldn't support it, and we will only stick RAM in systems that support it. They now are offering 2 systems in which they're sticking faster clock memory than the processor they've stuck in it is capable of. The 13-inch MacBook Pros and the MacBook Air, both of which the memory speed is faster than the speed, the front side bus speed limitation and memory controller limitations of the CPU they've stuck in the machine. I have mixed feelings about that. It makes sense on the MacBook Pro because it would actually drive the price up across the board to be buying 1066 RAM for the 13-inch and 1333 RAM for the 15 and 17-inch. But again, that goes back to, if you're putting 1333 RAM in it, why is there not an option there for me to upgrade the processor to a processor that will actually fully utilize that 1333 memory?
Yeah, well, I suppose the only thing is that the one thing I've often thought as to why Apple stays a step behind the full capabilities of what they could possibly push their laptops to, I suppose, is that the nearer to the full potential they push it, the more chance there might be for, problems, I suppose. It's the only thing I can think of. So
but see, now they're doing 180 the other way. They're sticking 1333 memory in a system that is clocked down to 1066 by the processor they've stuck in it.
So basically, the memory runs beyond what the processor can take it, is what you're saying.
So it's like, it's further compounded by the fact that with this refresh of the Macs, Apple's doing something that they've never done before. Whenever Apple would show their specs, they would show blah megahertz, blah processor. They didn't say anything about dual, quad core, anything. You had to go into the tech specs to see that. They just said you had blah gig of memory, and you had to go into the specs to realize it was 1066 and yada yada. But in the little flash thing here, they said that. They're doing what Apple fanboys always bash some of the lower OEMs for doing, and that if you're on Apple, if you go to Apple's site, like for the lower end 13-inch, which starts at roughly $1,200, they're saying 2.3 gigahertz dual core Intel i5 4 gigabyte 1333 megahertz. So they're selling on the fact that this is a 1333 megahertz system, but they're omitting for 90% of people who aren't going to really dig into this that CPU is clocked at 800/1066. In other words, it cannot make use of that 1333 memory.
So basically, people, like you say, who aren't in the know, are going to buy the memory and that processor, and the processor won't be able to take full advantage of what the memory could offer.
Yeah, basically, if you want to take advantage of that 1333 memory, you need to be buying at a minimum the $1,800 15-inch, which is the 2 gigahertz quad core. That CPU and the 2.2 gigahertz i7 that they're offering do support 1333. Those quad cores do, but the dual cores don't.
I mean, there's the only thing I can think of. I mean, there's got to be some crazy method behind Apple's idea of, basically crippling part of their 13-inch MacBook Pro.
It makes sense to be putting 1333 in all of these systems, because then they're just buying one set of memory chips. One set of memory chips for all the Mac Pros. That makes sense. It cuts their costs down to the sun. I just don't think they should be advertising it that way. That's not a 1333 system. So that shouldn't be there. It's a little misleading. It's one of those things. It's like when Verizon was saying you get unlimited data, asterisk 5 gigs. It's like, like 1333 asterisk 1066 due to limitation of CPU. It's like it's a little misleading, and it's historically it was something Apple tended not to do. With the Air, they started doing it, and it's looking from this refresh of the MacBook Pros that they're going to start being more and more misleading in their specs, so that you're going to have to become more and more of a, okay, but how much of this can I actually use? Which is something historically, at least as far as the memory and CPU, you didn't have to do with Apple. There were places they did it, but now they're doing it in that too.
Well, you just think that, it's just unfortunate that, that they've decided to go down that route, really, because it's really, from Apple's point of view, the thing is, if people feel they make good machines, they've got no need to mess around with the specs and basically, lie to people, really, have they?
Well, and a certain percentage of that may be trying to compete with some of their competition, because one of the things most of Apple's competition who are making systems who are actually in this league is you don't have to choose between what size screen you have and what processor you have. It's like you're allowed to all the ones they offer, you're allowed to upgrade that model and so on and so forth, all the way up. Like, I could put the processor for the 17-inch in the 13-inch on other manufacturers. With Apple, that's not an option. These are the models we offer. To a point, that's part of Apple's marketing. They've really they've tried to oversimplify it, where it's very few options. If you're trying to choose things like that, you obviously wanted another computer altogether. I personally disagree with that. I get their logic though.
I think the way they just see it is that the specs that they offer and the reason why they make them so differentiate from one another in some cases is because they believe that particular model should fit the people that want it, that there's no need for any modifications, I suppose.
Yeah. The other big thing they did with the Mac Pro refresh is they added, and I don't know because I didn't watch the Intel announcement, Thunderbolt. I don't know if Intel's called it Thunderbolt or if Apple has rebranded it Thunderbolt. You know, this is the light technology Intel was working on, capable of 10 gigabits, blah blah connections. This is one of those things I have really mixed feelings about, and the reason I say that is as follows. There are absolutely no devices whatsoever that use this standard right now. Now, the good thing about this thing is it's supposed to be able to basically be all the ports. You know, FireWire, USB, yada 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 yada. So eventually, the future of computers is you're going to just have this one universal port that can talk to everything. To make use of it at all right now, you need a dongle, and I don't know about you. You're a MacBook user. Do you honestly want to be carrying a dongle around with your MacBook so you can actually plug things into your universal port?
I mean, to be honest, I think that they were just complicating the situation even more than it already needed to be complicated, because the thing is, we already had an improvement already out there for 18 months, USB 3, and adding this now to the mix just makes things even more complicated, and it's more for people to think about. So I don't really know if it is necessary, and like you say, having to carry that extra thing around where USB 3, all that would have been was an extra port on new laptops, and that would have been the end of it.
Well, and honestly, what I'm almost thinking, because of the way the industry has been slow to adapt to USB 3, is what's probably going to happen is USB 3 is never going to happen. USB 3 is going to happen through Thunderbolt. In that, because Thunderbolt can handle USB 3.0 devices. But my guess is you're not going to be seeing laptops, for the most part, adding USB 3.0 ports. You're going to see them getting rid of USB ports altogether in favor of these Thunderbolt bolt ports that are a universal works with everything port. I have really mixed feelings about that, because it means we're all going to need to go get these $5 dongle adapters if our device didn't come with the proper one, and it's going to create havoc for anybody who has old USB things. It's going to be a transitional period, and it's one of those. Apple's first to stick it on. I have to give them credit for that, but it's one of those, there's no use for it right now. So I'm not sure it's a big deal at all. It's honestly going to matter if any devices come out in the next 6 months or not.
And also as well, I have to, question how much work is it really. It's like when they speak about it on the specs on their website, they list how much faster it is than FireWire 800, how much faster it is than USB 2.0, but conveniently they don't tell you how much faster it is than USB 3.0.
Oh, no. It's faster than USB 3.0 by considerably. Effectively, what a Thunderbolt port is, which this is basically the Intel Lightpeak technology, is it's connecting your peripheral devices like this directly through a PCI Express slot on the board circuitry. So it's as if you plugged your device directly into a PCIe port. It's that type of speed. So it is significantly faster than what USB is capable of.
Yeah, I think just from me, I think it was just more of an irritation there, because I'd have just liked to have seen them actually say how much faster it is. That's the only thing that was irritating me, was that, I just wish they had actually said how much better off are we investing it in Thunderbolt rather than USB 3, but as I say, they didn't actually state that amongst when they compared it to other technologies out there at the moment.
Well, the real reason they didn't do that is because it's honestly going to depend how you duplex that through that. A Thunderbolt thing can handle up to 6 things daisy chained together. So you could be plugging 6 devices into it. It's one of those, its bandwidth capability is this, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'd be using that. Although you could, it wouldn't surprise me though if somebody was to do something like make a RAID array removable storage, in which, for speed's sake, it's like 6 USB drives put in a RAID array for speed on a Thunderbolt port, and it's like, okay, let's use all 6 of these pipes. Let's daisy chain a portable RAID array. You could do that with a Thunderbolt connection. I doubt anyone will be anytime soon, but you could do it. So it's one of those, yeah, it's an upgrade, but it's an upgrade you can't use yet, and I'm sure the rest of the industry, we don't know if the new ThinkPad that just came out has this or not, because we don't know the full specs on that. I don't think it does. I think Apple is the only one making computers with this connection right now.
Yeah, well, that certainly hasn't appeared anywhere else until today.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to say on the MacBook Pros, or we want to just move on? Or at least they didn't change the price too much when they did this. So.
Yeah, well, and from my point of view, I think if they had gone flash state storage, I would have just rather they had an option for the hard drive. So I'm glad they haven't gone solid state storage and got rid of the hard drive. So I'm glad they didn't do that either.
Well, and they still have the option for those who want solid state to buy a ridiculously expensive, to upgrade to a 128 gigabyte solid state is $200, and it is $600 to go to a 256, and it is $1,200 to go to a 512. So if you want to swap your 500 gigabyte 5400 RPM solid state for a 512 gigabyte solid state, give Apple another $1,200.
Well, that's the thing as well, when people were saying about the flash storage though, that's another thing, is that would have undoubtedly raised the price, and I don't know if the price, what it would have been if they had done that, people would have had the money to spend on that.
Well, that depends how much of a margin Apple would have wanted on it. And the reason I say that is this. Realistically, if Apple was committing to doing solid state only, they would get rid of the cost of having to buy any spinning drives. And it's not a variable. It's not like it's an extra item. It's not like, because when you buy an upgrade from the company, what you're doing is you're paying both for the part they're taking out and for the part they're putting in, plus profit margin. So if they get rid of the part they're taking out altogether, the cost actually goes down. And Apple has bought an extreme amount of flash memory, solid state. Realistically, they probably could have made the MacBook Pros entirely solid state, flash and so on, like the Air. Although I'm kind of glad they didn't for the end user thing. If they're going to do that, I'd rather they switch to solid state drives than integrated like they have on the MacBook Air. But And they could have done a conversion like that realistically, probably for as little as a few $100s a unit. Which means they wouldn't have really had to eat into their... Basically, they could have just rounded the prices up. You know, the $1,800 book's now $2,000, and it's solid state standard. Now, that's not the Apple way. The Apple way would be the $1,800 book is now $2,500, and...
Well, that's the thing. I doubt it would have been much cheaper. It probably would have been, you know, probably very close to what the solid state storage is now. I would have thought.
Yeah.
If you look at Apple's way of doing things.
Very, very true. Oh wait, hold on. That's on.
Oh.
We may have a bit joining us. One sec, new camera. I knew he was frickin' with his camera! Alright, we'll wait a second on bit. I'm sure he has plenty to say on the MacBook Pros. You're all black. Now you're all pixelated. I can't hear you. I see frustration. I see a great deal of frustration on his face. I'm getting 1 minute signs. He's hung up. He'll call back, I'm sure. That's like... And I'm glad I didn't call the episode name anything derogatory towards Bit for not showing up. That's like I knew he was screwing with shit.
You did, yeah.
Oh look, he's only an hour late. Maybe they had a special daylight savings time I don't know about in his area. You're now watching Technical Background Theater, not to be confused with Technical Background Theater. Bits are standing by.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. I can barely see you, but I can hear you.
You can barely see me.
You look somewhat pixelated is all.
This is an HP webcam that I've had. It's old.
Just so you know, you probably want to tilt it up some, or you either want to sit down some. That's okay. If you lean back a little, you'll probably just be...
So you're telling me this is worse than the other camera?
You might want to tilt that up a little more, because your forehead's getting cut off. It's okay. It's like the white balance is off. You're not fuzzy, and you are sharp, but where you end and the background starts to begin, it's like it's not a smooth transition. It's like I can see pixels around there.
Okay, well, I don't know what to do. I mean...
Anyways, we were talking about the new MacBook Pros. Alright. Any thoughts? We kind of almost just we were actually about finished covering them actually, but I was giving much though I don't want to. I was giving Apple credit for actually using the same socket in the 13 inches, 15 inches, and 17 inches. And I was giving them credit for upgrading to 1333 memory and for upgrading to dedicated graphics. I'm still waiting to see if the dedicated graphics fixes the smart switching problem.
Right, we were discussing last time.
Yeah, and the other thing I was... Apple has never, when they like show their notebook specs, they've never like said the operating frequency. You know, like 1333, 1066.
Yes.
That's always been obscure in the specs, and they're doing that now, and that's very misleading on the 13 inches because the 13 inches are dual cores that are clocked at 800/1066. So they can't use that 1333 memory. I think it's very... I don't have a problem with them using the same memory in all the systems because it makes sense for cost savings, but they shouldn't be claiming 1333 when it's not a 1333 system.
Okay.
Anything else you want to add on those, or what's your general impression on the MacBook refresh?
I'm never one really that gets excited, particularly when Apple comes up with product refreshes. To me, it's something that should happen, whether it's a Dell or HP, and everybody does what they can, to make it work within their price point. The only thing that I think is neat that is new would be the Copper Peak, or Thunderbolt. But other than that, I would say there are many Apple fans that say, "Oh, well, there's no design refresh." I don't quite know how to please everybody. To me, the internals count more than
the internals count a lot more, and honestly, everybody that was I hate Apple, but when I started hearing people going, "Oh, there's no design refresh," they haven't reinvented the way the outside of the MacBook Pro looks. I'm like, I hate Apple. I don't like the looks of Mac Pros, but I thought about that and I'm like, the systems I like is because they've looked like they've looked for the last decade. They found a design that works and they stuck with it. And why the feel and look of a MacBook Pro is not for me. I don't think it makes sense at all for Apple to just come up with a whole new design for the MacBook Pro. It doesn't make any sense at all. The people who are buying MacBook Pros, a good number of them are buying them because they like that look and feel. And if they go refresh that, they risk pissing all of them off.
Exactly. And it took a while. I don't know if anybody has followed the generations of the MacBook. There used to be complaints about where the keyboards were placed, how sharp the bevel is, how the monitors behave and resolutions. They'd be complaining about speeds as well, and I think that slowly but surely Apple phased out a lot of the older MacBooks and then made them all pretty much that chrome look, except for the base model, I believe, and really consolidated, I think, a lot of the different models where you had the white, black before, and then now you have just the chrome, and I think there's more that I guess are considered under the Pro class, and I think the design works. I don't hear anybody complaining about the sharp edges or keyboard placement and bevels.
The main thing I don't like about it is that the battery isn't easily removable and the color. And those are things that could be changed without in any way, shape, or form changing the design. It'd be a minor tweak to the external case and a minor... and basically having the option to have the aluminum painted. And that's not a redesign. That's not a new body. That's not like we're doing something. It's one of the few things I think Apple has gotten right, that they've largely, once they figured out what worked there, they largely left it alone.
Why would they want to change it? I mean, it's all... They're going to just spur up a whole new set of complaints and people saying, "Oh, I hate the new design, and why did they do that?" You just can't win. I guess with a lot of Apple fans. Either they want a new change, and if there is a new change, well, the new change sucks. And if there is no change, then Apple sucks yet again because they didn't do anything, and it's just an internal.
Well, yeah, but
change.
to all those people who are saying that, and again, I hate Apple, so it pains me to be pointing out that Apple's doing something right. But if Apple was to make a change for change's sake to the MacBook Pro, you'd wind up with something like what the new iPod Nano is. And does anybody who buys a Mac Pro really want something like that to happen to the Mac Pro? Of course, that being said, the people who are buying Mac Pros are becoming a ever-shrinking percentage of Apple's market. And that more and more people are interacting with Apple through something like an iPad or an iPhone or an iMac. Not the MacBook Pro and the Mac Pro are becoming very much the fringe Mac users as things go forward.
Kind of like what we were discussing last time, and where computing is going, and people are just trying to go to devices that suit more of their needs and use, I guess, less computing. It would be dubbed.
Anyways, what were you saying, Phil?
I think you have to say that Apple users probably have been a bit spoiled with all the design changes, because when I was hearing the complaints as well, I was like, what's the what was the problem? Apart from the graphics issue, the MacBook Pro itself, it actually does work. So why change it and cause something going wrong? So I think people have been spoiled over the years with the design changes, probably.
Well, and like Bit's saying, that's the internal hardware. The internal hardware has nothing whatsoever to do with the external look and feel.
Exactly.
It's I'm sure at some point Apple will upgrade the default screens to high def screens, 1080 or better. I'm sure they'll do that at some point. It is an upgradable option in the higher end Mac Pros, but it's not the default configuration. There's still those low res screens by default. Sounds like we've said about all we want to say on that. Yeah, it's like, and the Thunderbolt is an interesting technology.